as it's recording on its own. But what I want to try and get into is jumping back then. So at what point when you was visiting these distilleries did you actually suddenly think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, why don't we do that?
It was the very first distillery that we visited. So we visited 2 distilleries on day 1. Like our kind of trip was spread out over probably about a month. So we did a few distilleries at a time. And the first one was Belgrave Distillery, run by Pt2. So we turned up at this farm. We knew nothing of him other than he was kind of a bit infamous in the Tasmanian whiskey world for various different reasons. And we kind of drove down this dirt track to this farm. And Peter is this awesome, really incredibly skilled guy, one of these people who just seems to know and be able to do everything. He was originally a farmer, or he still was a farmer, a rye farmer, who had been doing some work at a local distillery, kind of, I think, repairing their copper still. And he one year had a surplus of rye crop and thought, well, hang on a minute, you know, I can probably make my own still. I've got some rye, why don't I make my own rye whiskey? So he set about floor malting it himself, you know, really small batches, a few hundred bottles at a time. Built his own still. He powered it using biofuel that he made himself from old kitchen oil. He showed us this dryer that he was working on, a peat smoker essentially, and it was an old, I can't remember if it was a washing machine or a tumble dryer, big rusty old thing that he was in the process of turning into his peat smoker. And he said, I think he set it up for about 20 grand in total, maybe 20,000 US dollars. And his whiskey, I think at the time, was the most expensive whiskey you could buy. And he then went on the year later to be stocked in Noma, the pop-up restaurant. So Noma's like one of the world's, you know, best restaurants. So he'd become really famous because he was just so innovative. And like for me, it was, oh my God, you don't need £5 million to start a whiskey distillery. You just need the bare essentials. It's just about the spirit. It's about, you know, the ingredients, and forget all of the marketing stuff. It's just about one man making some really, really good whiskey. So once we kind of stripped it back to that, it was like, oh, maybe we could do this. In the afternoon of the same day, it was the complete like opposite end of the scale. It's still really small though, still pretty kind of what I regard as craft. And that was Nant Distillery. Now, Nant, you don't know whether any of you guys have heard recently, has been embroiled in quite a lot of controversy. But at the time, this was pre-controversy. And this was in a beautiful estate, and it had this old like water mill, stone buildings, you know, really like iconic and romantic. They had their own natural water source and everything. It was beautiful. And these guys, I remember in this beautiful kind of still house, stepping in, it was all steamy, and there was this guy in overalls, and he was covered in draft, and he was stirring the mash by hand. And it was just like, oh my God, this is my dream job. I want to be doing this. I want to be there making, stirring. It smells amazing. And I said to him, how did you get this job? Like, how did you come to be here in this awesome place? And he said he was a backpacker. He applied for a job on Gumtree. Like, that just blew my mind. Because, you know, up to this point when I'd been doing my PhD, when I realized that I didn't want to stay in science, like I was doing biomedical science at this time, and I realized it wasn't for me, I'd looked into going into the food industry, going into brewing and distilling. But everywhere I looked, you needed a degree from Heriot Watt, you know, you needed 5 years of experience before anybody would even consider taking you on. So I just ruled it out. And then here was this guy saying, I've got no experience, I was trained on the job, and now I'm making really great whiskey. So those kind of two things happened in that one day that completely changed the trajectory of our lives. And that's pretty much it. Everything else just snowballed from there.
And so when you obviously got to the end of that day then, and you were obviously sat looking at each other talking about things, was it an instant, let's just do this, or was it a slow process? Even though you knew you probably would end up doing it, it was just a, yeah, we're going to do it, but can we do it? Or is it just, no, we're just going to do this?
It looking back at it, it was kind of a whirlwind romance with whiskey. Like, we were drinkers, but we knew nothing of it. So we made a really quick transition from, I like drinking whiskey, to, oh my God, how awesome is this spirit? There's so much to kind of take on board, to let's make it. You know, looking back, that's ludicrous. It seemed so crazy at the time, but when we were thinking about it and we were thinking about our skills, you know, I worked in a lab. Like, I was very much focused on the process, the science. That's what I kind of, you know, was obsessed with, was the science of it, and the art and the science and the craft, and that you can control it so much, but the rest is kind of up to the environment and the elements and you know, various different things. And for Chris, obviously, he was an architect, so it was the idea of building this awesome space that we could host people. We'd been to lots of cellar doors of the vineyards in Tasmania. Obviously, we'd been to the tasting rooms at these distilleries, and they all had that unifying kind of character about them, that, like, here's the spirit, but here's where we make it. Here are the barrels, the stills. Like, there was that very, very close connection between you and the product and the producer. So, you know, for Chris, it was the idea about creating this nice kind of cozy, warm space where we could host people with a window into the distillery, so we could like have no secrets, essentially. Like, this is us, this is how we make it, to kind of take away that barrier between you, the drinker, and the kind of the process. That's kind of, they were our major take-home things. And the beauty of our experience there was, when we asked questions, we got a genuine answer. It wasn't there was just kind of no mystery about it. And it was like, whiskey was for everybody, whether you were male, female, young, old. Like, you were never judged. There was no assumptions. If you were there because you just loved flavor, you loved whiskey. So for me, obviously, you know, a lot has changed in the industry over the years, but at that time, that for me was like just a new concept.
Yeah. So jumping forward for just a brief second, what was the parents' attitude when you actually first told them, sorry, mum and dad, you know, we're not going to be an architect and a scientist. We're actually going to make whiskey for a living instead, and we're going to do it in your backyard?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, first of all, imagine how you would react if you're, you know, if your child who you just put through university, you know, who'd been studying for 7 years, just turned around and said, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. Not for me. Yeah, thanks for putting me through that, but no. So that was a bit of a shock. And then the phone call when I was like, hey mom, hey dad, yeah, so we've figured out what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. Okay. We're gonna build a whiskey distillery. Say what? Yeah, they thought we were bonkers, really.
Yeah. So I take it took a little bit of persuading then, or
I literally had to put together this kind of mood board, these photos of, you know, Peter Bignell and his like little peat smoker, of you know, Lark Distillery and the stirring the mash, and just the size of it, the kind of really small scale, like, look, it's in a garage. You know, Overeem whiskey at the time, I think they've expanded now, but was in Casey Overeem's back garden in a garage. He had 2 stills squashed in. His cousin was distilling it from. And it was like, look, we don't need loads of space. We don't need loads of money in the bank. it's a goer. Just, you know, bear with us. We're working on it, and we'll take it from there. But yeah, it did take a little bit of convincing. But my dad's been a whiskey drinker. It was, you know, I got into whiskey because of my dad. He's always drunk it. So it didn't take that much.
No, your dad was well on board, I guess.
Yeah.
But, so jumping back then, you obviously still in Tasmania, and then you come across Bill Lark. So, I mean, for a lot of people who don't know who he is, just kind of, you know, how big was the impression from him? I mean, obviously, I get the feeling it was massive, but, you know, in your words, what made him so special?
Bill Lark is, I describe him as like Father Christmas of whiskey. He's this really lovely, friendly, enthusiastic chap who is, you know, despite kind of being Whiskey Hall of Fame and you know, he was really instrumental in helping a lot of the early distilleries start up and get into production. So meeting him was great. You know, at the time we became experts on Tasmanian whiskey because we were pretty much the only two people to have visited all the distilleries within a short space of time. So we got a real snapshot of what they were doing and, you know, their plans for expansion and who was doing what and who came from where. And so yeah, meeting Bill was great because we actually did whiskey school where we had like a week-long intense, you know, kind of learning how to distill, learning about cask maturation, and he helped us put together our business plan. So we literally bounced ideas off him, you know, what if we did this and how does that work? And he was great, so encouraging. There was never at any point he was like, guys, you know nothing about this, you know, why are you doing this? This is mad. It was always just, if you've got the passion and you've got the drive to learn, then you can do it. So he was, I mean, the Aussies have a very different attitude, you know, to us kind of Brits. There it was, you know, we'd tell people the idea and they'd be like, oh, good on you, you know, when's it ready? When can I drink it? You know, here it's like, oh, you sure you want to quit your job? You know, what about your mortgage? And that's a bit risky. You know, none of that. It was like, when's it ready? You know, quit talking about it, put it into action.
I mean, the thing that you get from just watching and listening to you now is as soon as you mention anything about Tasmania and Bill, and there's always a big smile comes across. So it's obviously really has imprinted a lot of good memories. Yeah,
it has. I can't, it's a very difficult place to describe. It's everybody's so warm and so friendly. It's a very intimate place. And the food there, you know, from whiskey to chocolate to wine to seafood, the whole place is obsessed with food and flavor. So you cannot help but get caught up in that excitement, enthusiasm. And I guess kind of as I speak about it now, that's probably where our obsession for kind of local produce came from, and talking about the ingredients. You know, for us, it's about the grain, etc. For the gin, you know, it's about some of the botanicals that we grow and source locally. And I think it's that obsession with it, with the raw ingredients, and being able to see, you know, literally like you could walk to the shore and, you know, pick your own oysters off you know, kind of where land meets sea. So I think that connection to the people, the farmers, the place, that all, I guess, subconsciously helped shape what we're doing now.
So let's jump forward. You've had your jolly holiday in Tasmania. You've learned all about making whiskey. You've suddenly decided to give up your careers, come back to England, go mad, build a distillery. You've landed back in England. You've got home. You've obviously sat down with your parents and convinced them now. What was the process? You know, how long from the point of you deciding? Obviously, we know it was back in 2014, but how long before building work and things like that started to happen, and what was the process?
So we went to Tassie in 2014. We came back at the start of 2016. So pretty much when we landed, it was hit the ground running. We'd already written the business plan. The main thing we needed was the funding. That was like, how on earth are we going to do this? We'd been saving for a house deposit. So we put that into the business. That got us a driveway and a slab, and that was it, you know. So we kind of knew that we needed to think a bit outside the box. You know, went to the bank with our Aussie accents and our nice tans and was like, we're going to make whiskey. It's going to be 3-5 years before we make any money, but, you know, will you lend us? No, absolutely not. Don't be ridiculous. So we hit a bit of a roadblock with the bank, but we kind of knew that anyway. So we opened the Founders Club, and that was a way to invite people in to like literally follow the journey from the very start before we'd even, you know, kind of put any bricks down, to watch the build through to the distillation, the spirit maturation, through to the final kind of whiskey bottling, so that they could see it evolve. I think, you know, because for us, it felt right to kind of bring people along that journey with us. I mean, it was, you know, it was quite unique, especially for this area. And it was just kind of unique. It was literally like a dream sort of, you know, kind of vision unfolding. And it kind of felt nice to invite people along to support that. So they, the founders, we've got like over 500 now. They helped put in the cash to build it, and to get the equipment. And then we could go to the bank and say, look, we've proved the concept, you know, we're producing. Now will you kind of fill the gap? So we did. And we sold a little bit of the company as well. So we've got some equity investors, which are really, really good. They help kind of shape a little bit of what we do. So they're good mentors as well. So we've got a good support network. But yeah, the funding was the biggest hurdle, because we had to convince a lot of people that we were serious and that we knew what we were doing, and that we had, you know, the kind of the nose to make a good whiskey.
So obviously you've come back and you've obviously allowed Chris to put a plan forward as to how you're going to have your building. You've set the footings, which a lot of us have seen the progress of. Now, I know you sort of said earlier about your still. So your still's quite unique. You obviously went down a thought process of, well, we're going to make whiskey, but we're going to kind of do it the Tasmanian way still, rather than just be like Scotland or whatever. So, you know, what's unique about the still, and why did you go down that route?
We went down that route because we'd had, I mean, you know, we learned how to make whiskey in Tasmania, not in Scotland. So we were very much influenced by the Tasmanian way of doing things, and the small casks. Mainly it was the still. It was the still style, the shape of it, which is quite distinct from Scotland. You know, we've got a 900 litre pot still that we charge for 600 litres at a time. It's electrically heated as well, so it's heated from underneath. We run on green energy here, so it's all run by green electricity. It just made sense for us to have, like, we love the style of spirit. Obviously, you know that the shape of the still affects the character of the spirit quite considerably. So it just made sense for us to have that. We fell in love with Tasmania, so I couldn't have a Scottish still. I had to have a Tasmanian one. Yeah. And it was a combination of, like, so they were using Franklin barley at the time, which was brewer's barley, kind of low alcohol yield versus a distiller's grain, but really, really good flavour. So it was those two main things, plus the smaller cask size, because we mature in 100 litre rather than a 200 litre. So that was the biggest influence.
So I suppose for those that maybe haven't seen the still, I think from my memory, it's kind of more like a water tank shape rather than a typical bulbous sort of thing, which, you know, yeah, I mean, it's very unique. And I know, I think if from memory, it took quite a long time to get over as well.
It did, yeah. So we put a deposit down on the still there. We had to wait a few years for it to go through the manufacturing process, because it was custom built. But yeah, we had it shipped over. It came across the sea in a crate, and it was kind of halfway along its journey in the middle of the ocean, when we just, both of us had that kind of weird thought, like, you insured it, right? And we were like, oh, I thought, Chris was like, no, I thought they were insuring at that end. When we did a little bit of digging, it turned out neither of us insured it. So this whole thing was in the middle of its journey across the ocean without any insurance whatsoever. So that was quite a nerve jangling time, but it arrived. Intact. It was small enough for us to kind of manhandle it. We put it together ourselves. It came with a whole host of instructions. It didn't, that's a lie. It came with a little note from Tasmania that said, "Hello from Tassie." And that was, we had no other instructions. So we had to figure it out ourselves, which was quite funny. And again, because it was unique to here. So it is the only one of its kind outside of Australia and New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
We had to have the electrical work done at this side, just for the certificates and everything. So nobody had worked with this heating mechanism before. So the very, very first time that we installed the elements, we went to commission the still, we had smoke billowing out from underneath it. I was like, oh my God, what have we done? But it turns out that when it had been fitted, the guys had put like an aluminium frame to hold the elements up to the still. Aluminium has a relatively low melting point versus copper, so the whole thing just melted. So that's